3 scorecards, same conflict, same 7 weeks, 3 completely different outcomes. Scorecard 1, the United States, 3 carrier strike groups deployed, 850 Tomahawk cruise missiles fired, $40 billion in defense operations. Military victory achieved by every conventional measure. The Iranian fleet destroyed. The air defense is gone. The missile factory is rubble. And the Strait of Hormuz is still closed. And oil is still above $100 a barrel. And the global economy is still bleeding $40 billion a week. Scorecard 2, Iran. 120 warships on the seabed. Air defense network eliminated. Nuclear programs set back by years. Every major military asset destroyed in 2 weeks. And $280 billion in economic damage inflicted on the global economy. A 28-to-1 return on 40 years of investment. The strait still closed. The question changed. Scorecard 3, China. 0 warships deployed. 0 missiles fired. 0 defense spending on this conflict. 0 ships at risk. Iranian oil purchased at $60 a barrel, while the rest of the world pays $100. Strategic petroleum reserves filled at the cheapest price in a decade. Western manufacturing competitors absorbing elevated energy costs that Chinese factories do not pay. A live field test of the exact geographic denial strategy China plans to use in the Taiwan Strait. Conducted entirely by someone else, at someone else's expense. 2 nations fighting, 1 nation winning. And the 1 nation winning is the one that never showed up. Subscribe to War Vision. 6 videos into this series, we have explained how the US Navy is defeating Iran and how Iran is winning the economic war despite that defeat. This video explains who is winning both and what they plan to do with everything they just learned. Type A in the comments if you already know where this analysis ends. Before we get to China's specific gains, we need to understand why China's position in this conflict is almost never discussed in Western analysis. The answer is framing. Every major analysis of the Hormuz conflict frames it as a bilateral contest. United States versus Iran. Naval power versus asymmetric doctrine. The world's largest defense budget against a regional power with a fraction of the resources. That framing misses the third party that structured its entire strategic position around benefiting from exactly this kind of conflict, regardless of who wins it. China has a word for this concept. It comes from a 36th stratagem of ancient Chinese military philosophy. Zuoshan Guan Hudo. Sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. Do not join the fight. Do not favor either tiger. Simply watch. And when both tigers are exhausted, descend from the mountain. China has been descending from the mountain for 7 weeks. Here is the full accounting of what it has collected on the way down. To understand the scale of China's gain, you need 1 number as a baseline. China imports approximately 11 million barrels of oil per day. Every dollar reduction in the price China pays per barrel saves China $11 million per day. $330 million per month, $4 billion per year. China is currently paying approximately $60 per barrel for Iranian crude, a 40% discount to the Brent benchmark of $100 plus. That $40 discount applied to China's Iranian import volume. Approximately 5 million barrels per day saves China $60 million per day, $420 million per week, $1.8 billion per month. For every month Hormuz stays closed, China saves $1. $8 billion on Iranian oil imports alone. The conflict that is costing the global economy $40 billion per week is saving China $1. $8 billion always per month in energy procurement costs. That is before we get to the strategic petroleum reserve, before we get to the manufacturing advantage, before we get to the Taiwan research dividend. Let us go through each one. The mechanism behind the 40% discount is straightforward, but its strategic implications extend far beyond the price differential. Iran needs buyers. The conflict has eliminated every Western market for Iranian crude. Sanctions enforcement has been total and immediate. The only major economy still buying Iranian oil in volume is China, operating through a network of state-owned enterprises, independent refiners known as teapot refineries in Shandong province, and trading intermediaries that provide enough transactional distance for plausible deniability. Iran's negotiating position with China is weak. Iran needs the revenue. China is the only buyer at scale. When you have 1 buyer and you need the sale, the buyer sets the price. $60 per barrel. Paid in yuan, not dollars, through settlement mechanisms that bypass the SWIFT financial messaging system entirely. Iran gets revenue. China gets oil. Neither transaction touches the dollar-denominated global financial system. Now let us do the math on the strategic petroleum reserve opportunity. China's strategic petroleum reserve capacity is approximately 500 million barrels, the equivalent of roughly 90 days of import cover at current consumption rates. Before the conflict, China's SPR was estimated at between 60 and 70% full. Current purchasing patterns suggest China is actively filling the remaining capacity at $60 per barrel, filling 150 million barrels of reserve capacity at $60 per barrel, $9 billion. Filling the same capacity at $100 per barrel, the price China would pay without the conflict discount. $15 billion, China is saving $6 billion on strategic petroleum reserve procurement, a one-time strategic asset accumulation, because the conflict created the discount. When Hormuz reopens and oil returns to pre-conflict price levels, analysts project $70 to $75 per barrel in a resolve scenario. China will hold 500 million barrels of oil purchased at an average cost of roughly $65 per barrel, against a market price of $70 to $75. The strategic reserve becomes a financial asset as well as an energy security asset. Every barrel China bought at $60 during the conflict is worth $10 to $15 more the day the strait reopens. 500 million barrels times $12. $50 average appreciation. $6. 25 billion in unrealized gain sitting in underground salt caverns in Shandong and Xinjiang. China has turned a geopolitical crisis it did not create into a $6 billion commodity investment that pays off the moment the crisis ends. That is not luck. That is positioning. The oil discount is the visible gain. The manufacturing advantage is the invisible one. And over a 10-year horizon, it is the larger of the two. Energy is a production input for every manufactured good. The cost of energy determines the cost of making steel, aluminum, glass, chemicals, cement, paper, textiles, semiconductors, and every product that requires heat, power, or electrochemical processes to produce. When the energy cost differential between two competing manufacturing economies widens, the competitive economics of every energy-intensive industry shift, not dramatically in 1 week, significantly over 7 weeks, permanently if the differential persists long enough to drive investment decisions. Let us put numbers on the differential. European manufacturers, Germany, France, Italy, the Netherlands, are paying approximately $95 to $110 per megawatt hour for industrial electricity during the Hormuz closure, up from $65 to $70 pre-conflict. That 50% increase in industrial energy costs translates directly into reduced margins on every energy-intensive product these manufacturers export. German steel producers are paying approximately $40 more per ton of steel produced than they were before February 28th. That $40 per ton cost increase, applied to Germany's steel export volume of approximately 15 million tons per year, represents $600 million in annual margin erosion. Chinese steel producers are paying approximately $8 less per ton than before the conflict, because Chinese industrial electricity is priced partly on domestic coal and partly on oil-linked contracts, and China's oil procurement discount feeds through to industrial energy pricing over a 60 to 90-day lag. The competitive gap between German and Chinese steel producers widened by approximately $48 per ton during 7 weeks of Hormuz closure. That gap is reflected in export pricing. Chinese steel is now $48 per ton cheaper than German steel relative to the pre-conflict baseline. Every procurement manager in every importing country making a sourcing decision right now is looking at the $48 differential. Steel is one industry. Run the same calculation through aluminum, chemicals, glass, paper, and basic plastics, the feedstock industries that supply every downstream manufacturer, and the total competitive shift in manufacturing economics between China and Western Europe in 7 weeks of Hormuz closure is measured in tens of billions of dollars in annual production cost advantage. Those advantages do not disappear when Hormuz reopens. Procurement relationships shift toward lower-cost suppliers and take years to reverse. Capital investment decisions made during the closure, factories, long-term supply contracts, logistics infrastructure, are made on 7-week cost realities and locked in for 5 to 10 years. Every week, Hormuz stays closed. The global manufacturing order shifts slightly but irreversibly toward Chinese production. China does not need to win the shift decisively in 7 weeks. China needs it to accumulate over 7 years. The conflict gave it 7 weeks of acceleration. For free. This is the profit that does not show up in any economic accounting. It cannot be measured in dollars. It can only be measured in strategic capability. And it is the most valuable thing China has collected from the Hormuz conflict. China's military planners have spent 7 weeks watching the most detailed real-world test of geographic denial doctrine ever conducted against American carrier groups. Not a war game, not a simulation. A live operational test with real ships, real weapons, real decisions, and real outcomes, conducted entirely by Iran, paid for entirely by Iran, at the cost of Iran's entire military capability. And China took notes on everything. Here is what China's People's Liberation Army Navy strategists now know with operational precision that they did not know on February 27th. First, carrier group response timing. The U.S. Navy took approximately 96 hours from the political authorization of Operation Epic Fury to the first strike on Iranian territory, 96 hours from decision to first Tomahawk. That response timeline tells China exactly how much operational action can be taken in a conflict's opening window before American precision strike capability arrives at scale. In a Taiwan scenario, 96 hours is an eternity. In 96 hours, China can move a significant military operation to a point of irreversibility that changes the entire strategic calculus of American intervention. Second, mine clearance rates. The U.S. Navy is clearing approximately 8 to 12 mines per day in operational conditions at Hormuz. The navigable portion of the Taiwan Strait is approximately 110 miles wide, significantly wider than the 6-mile Hormuz corridor. But the Taiwan Strait also has significantly more complex seabed topography and tidal current patterns that complicate mine hunting. China now has precise data on American mine clearance doctrine, the specific assets deployed, their operational tempo, and the conditions under which clearance rates accelerate or decelerate. That data feeds directly into China's mine seeding calculations for any Taiwan contingency. If the U.S. Navy clears 10 mines per day and China seeds 2,000 mines, the Hormuz number, the clearance timeline is 200 days. If China seeds 10,000 mines across the Taiwan Strait approaches, the clearance timeline is 1,000 days. Nearly 3 years. At $40 billion per week in global economic disruption, 3 years of Taiwan Strait closure inflicts economic damage on a scale that makes Hormuz look like a rehearsal. China watched Iran seed 2,000 mines and sustain a 6-week closure. China is calculating what 10,000 mines would do to the timeline. Third, insurance market thresholds. China's strategists now know the specific actuarial conditions under which Lloyd's of London suspends war risk cover for a major shipping corridor. They know the mine density required to create the uncertainty that triggers suspension. They know the clearance rate required to restore actuarial confidence. They know the one-tanker rule, that a single hull loss resets the insurance market to zero, regardless of prior clearance progress. This knowledge is directly applicable to the Taiwan Strait, through which approximately 88% of global semiconductor production capacity's supply chain transits. Disrupting that supply chain through insurance market suspension, not military action, not blockade, simply actuarial uncertainty, inflicts economic damage on every semiconductor-dependent economy on Earth. Apple, Samsung, TSMC's customers, every automaker, every defense contractor that uses advanced electronics. The insurance suspension of the Taiwan Strait approaches does not require China to fire a single weapon. It requires China to create enough mine-induced actuarial uncertainty that Lloyd's underwriters cannot price the risk. Iran demonstrated the mechanism at Hormuz. China is calibrating it for Taiwan. Fourth, carrier group exclusion geometry. The U.S. Navy did not bring carriers inside the Persian Gulf during this conflict. We covered why in our carrier missile video. 40 years of Iranian area denial investment made the risk calculus unacceptable for a $13 billion irreplaceable asset. China watched the exclusion zone work, not because Iran's weapons could reliably hit a carrier, because the combination of mines, missiles, fast attack threats, and geographic constriction created a risk environment the Navy would not accept for its most valuable assets. The Taiwan Strait is 110 miles wide at its narrowest navigable point. The South China Sea approaches to the strait are covered by China's DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missile with a range of 1,500 kilometers. China has watched the U.S. Navy calculate that the Persian Gulf, a 540 nautical mile body of water, is too risky for carrier operations. China is now calculating the equivalent exclusion geometry for the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea. The conclusion China is drawing: a carrier group excluded from the Taiwan Strait cannot provide close air support to a Taiwan defense operation at the tempo required to be decisive. If the carrier operates from beyond the DF-21D's effective engagement envelope, approximately 900 to 1,000 nautical miles, its aircraft face the same transit time problem we described in the USS Tripoli video. 2-hour flights each way, 40 minutes on station. Gaps measured in hours between patrols. Iran created that exclusion geometry at Hormuz with $10 billion over 40 years. China has a defense budget of $225 billion per year and has been building its exclusion geometry for Taiwan for 20 years. Hormuz was the proof of concept. Taiwan is the application. This is the longest range gain China extracts from the Hormuz conflict, and the one with the most significant implications for the global financial architecture that undergirds American strategic power. The United States dollar is the world's reserve currency. Approximately 58% of global foreign exchange reserves are held in dollars. Approximately 88% of all foreign exchange transactions involve the dollar on at least one side. Oil, the commodity that determines the energy cost of every manufactured good and every economy on Earth, is priced and traded in dollars globally. This dollar primacy is not accidental. It was constructed deliberately after World War II and reinforced after the 1973 oil crisis through the petrodollar arrangement, an informal agreement under which Gulf oil producers price oil in dollars and recycle oil revenues into dollar-denominated assets. In exchange, the United States provides security guarantees to Gulf producers. The petrodollar arrangement has two requirements. Gulf oil must flow. Gulf producers must be secure enough to honor the arrangement. For 7 weeks, Gulf oil has not flowed through Hormuz, and the security guarantee that was supposed to ensure it flows has been demonstrated to have limits. Limits defined by mines, insurance markets, and tanker captain risk calculations that lie outside American military control. Every non-Western finance ministry is watching this demonstration. Every central bank holding dollar reserves is recalculating the risk premium associated with dollar dependence. The specific calculation they are making: if the United States, at the peak of its military dominance with 3 carrier strike groups and 850 cruise missiles, cannot reopen a 6-mile shipping lane in 7 weeks, what is the reliability of the security guarantee that underpins dollar primacy? China has been working to answer that question for 15 years through the Belt and Road Initiative, through yuan-denominated oil settlement agreements with Saudi Arabia and Russia, through the construction of CIPS, the cross-border interbank payment system, as an alternative to SWIFT, and through the accumulation of gold reserves that now exceed 2,200 tons. Every week Hormuz stays closed is a week that argues China's case for non-dollar energy settlement more effectively than any diplomatic initiative China could mount. China does not need to make the argument. The Strait is making it for them. Let us do the math on what even a modest shift in dollar reserve dependence means. If global dollar reserve holdings fall from 58% to 54% of total reserves over the next 5 years, a 4 percentage point reduction, that represents approximately $800 billion in dollar-denominated assets being converted to other currencies. Reduced demand for dollar assets raises American borrowing costs. Raised borrowing costs increase the cost of the defense spending that maintains American military primacy. Increased defense costs create fiscal pressure that constrains military investment. China does not need to defeat the dollar. China needs to accelerate the trend that was already in motion. 7 weeks of Hormuz closure accelerates that trend more than any Chinese diplomatic initiative could. $800 billion in reserve reallocation, triggered by a 6-mile corridor that China did not close and does not control. That is the 4th profit China collects from a conflict it never joined. Here is what this analysis does not mean, and the distinction is important enough to spend real time on. China is not the hidden architect of this conflict. There is no credible evidence that China planned, encouraged, or facilitated Iran's decision to mine Hormuz or escalate toward military conflict with the United States. The evidence available in open sources suggests China was surprised by the scale and speed of Iran's escalation and has been managing the diplomatic and economic consequences reactively, not proactively. The gains China is extracting from this conflict are opportunistic, not conspiratorial. They are the natural result of China having positioned itself, over 15 years of deliberate policy, to benefit from exactly the kind of Western versus regional power conflict that Hormuz represents. China did not cause the opportunity. China engineered its position to capture it when it arrived. The distinction matters because the conspiratorial framing, China planned this, is both factually unsupported and strategically misleading. A China that planned this conflict is a China making an aggressive bet. A China that positioned itself to profit from it opportunistically is a China executing a long-term strategy that does not require any specific conflict to trigger it. The second China is more dangerous than the first because its strategy does not depend on any particular event going right. Second honest caveat: China's gains are not without costs and risks. China is Iran's primary economic lifeline. If the conflict expands to a point where the United States imposes secondary sanctions, specifically targeting Chinese entities that purchase Iranian oil, which congressional voices have been pushing for since week 3, China faces a choice between its Iranian oil discount and its access to the U.S. financial system. That is not a trivial choice. Additionally, 40% of China's own oil imports transit Hormuz. A sustained closure, beyond the current 7 weeks, begins to create supply security risks for China itself that no discount fully compensates for. China's strategic petroleum reserve provides a buffer. It is not an indefinite one. And the Taiwan research dividend cuts both ways. China has learned from Hormuz. So has the U.S. Navy, the mine clearance operations, the escort formation evolution, the insurance market mechanics, the combined arms response to asymmetric threats. All of it is being studied in Annapolis and Newport as intensively as it is being studied in Beijing. The lessons China is drawing for Taiwan, the United States is drawing for countering China's Taiwan strategy. The research dividend is not exclusively China's. The honest position? China is the largest net beneficiary of this conflict among all parties not directly fighting it. That advantage is real, substantial, and consequential. It is also bounded, conditional, and subject to reversal if American policy adapts faster than Chinese strategy expects. Now, step back from the individual profits, the oil discount, the manufacturing edge, the research dividend, the dollar pressure, and look at what China has assembled. In 7 weeks, without spending a dollar, without deploying a ship, without firing a weapon, China has saved $1. $8 billion per month on Iranian oil procurement. Accumulated $6, $25 billion in unrealized strategic petroleum reserve appreciation. Widened its manufacturing cost advantage over Western competitors by a measurable and partially irreversible margin. Conducted a live operational test of geographic denial doctrine against American carrier groups. Learned the precise actuarial thresholds of the Lloyd's war risk market. Measured American mine clearance rates under operational conditions. Documented carrier group response timing from political authorization to first strike. Accelerated the trend away from dollar reserve dependence by demonstrating American security guarantee limitations. Every one of those gains is applicable to Taiwan, directly, specifically, with operational precision that no war game or simulation could provide. Here's the Taiwan equation as China is now running it. The Taiwan Strait is 110 miles wide. It is the transit corridor for 88% of global semiconductor supply chain logistics. Closing it, not permanently, but long enough, inflicts economic damage on every semiconductor-dependent economy simultaneously. Every automaker, every consumer electronics company, every defense contractor that uses advanced chips, every data center, every AI company training models on GPU clusters. The global economy's dependence on Taiwan Strait transit is greater than its dependence on Hormuz. Hormuz carries oil. The Taiwan Strait carries the components that make the modern economy function at a level beyond energy. A Taiwan Strait closure of 60 days would inflict economic damage conservatively estimated at $2 trillion, not $280 billion, $2 trillion in 60 days.